Welcome to the world united. Welcome to the world united.
It was a great presentation, dear Alexander, and to listen to the history of Africa from the point of evolution, from the point of expansion, from the point of consciousness, from the point of paleontology. It's always great because the history of Africa is not sorry. Oh my God. Sorry. You could hear me? Okay. The history of Africa originates from time immemorial. It cannot be categorized in AD or BC. It has to be understood as BT, before time. So the history as is known, as is studied by our own explorers and archaeologists, the history of Africa exists even before. Because it has been existing from a very, very, very long time, Africa is the most mysterious place in the world. Enigmatic. Africa is called as dark continent. It is not dark because of ignorance. It is dark because of mystery. The world, the human species has not explored its deeper chambers, its mystical chambers, yet to be known chambers. The picture behind me, the pyramids of Egypt, is yet to be explored. So many chambers need to come out. So much wisdom has to come out. How in those days, in an area of 13 acres almost, with 450 feet, people could build these pyramids. Each stone weighing from 2 tons to 75 tons. And none of these stones are available nearby. They are almost 500 miles away. How could they bring this such a heavy stones? Mystery. They have not used any cementum, only granite and limestone, fit in a jigsaw puzzle. Always mysterious. If it is only for preserving mummies, there is no need to build such a huge structure. It is beyond something more. Same with pyramids of Sudan. So same with Olduvai Grange. So many mystical sites of Africa, challenging the humans to explore themselves. Maybe the time will come in future, as the day one speaker Edwin was talking about, the human species is not awakened yet to Africa. So the time will come in future when the humans will get awakened. So here I have got a question for you, Alexander. If the history or human species emerged from Africa, what do you think it was there in other continents? Australasia, Europe, or American continents? What was there? There were no humans there, only animals. If so, how do you think it must be when humans originated only from Africa?
Excellent question. So I don't necessarily think that there's anything else in other parts of the world. But what is evident in the fossil record is that the origins, you have two primary groups of hominids. You have the Australopithecines, and you have obviously Homo, which is our genus. Now, with the fossil record of the origins of, or the divergence between our monkeys and what ultimately became humans. So around about the 7 to 10 million years ago, you have this branching, this fork that took place. And what happens is around about somewhere in that window, you had an excessive branch of species that evolved that ultimately became monkeys and apes. And on a different branch, you had the species that ultimately led to the origins of humans, or anatomically modern humans. So, you know, fossils relating to human origins are some of the rarest fossils in the world. If you, for example, consider a site like Sterkfontein Caves, you have hundreds of thousands of bones excavated. And of those hundreds of thousands of bones, you have very few that relate directly to understanding the origins of our species. So, you know, you're kind of looking for a needle in a haystack. And for many years in Southern Africa and in East Africa, there's been this perception that these things are so rare that you're not going to find them anymore. And in the last 10 years, Professor Lee Berger and his exploration teams have been incredibly successful in finding more hominid species in the last decade than what was found in the 5 or 6 decades prior to that. So, you know, I said as early in 2010 that the golden age of paleoanthropology is definitely this decade, the 2010 to 2020, because the picture of the human origins is continuously changing. And that's very exciting. You know, I think that the species originated here merely as an evolutionary projection. You know, people always think that one species gave rise to another species that gave rise to another species that gave rise to humans. And it's not true. You know, it's not a simplistic fork-like environment. You have to almost consider speciation or the origins of modern humans as almost being a very complex tree, that there wasn't only some species, there was multiple species on the landscape. And we're only really now starting to understand and get a better idea of what that picture looks like. But what is clear is that somewhere around the 200,000 year mark, anatomically modern humans were in East Africa, and they only really started to find similar skeletal remains by about 70,000 years ago in Asia. So you have this migration out of East Africa that comes down into Southern Africa again, heads across into Europe and then into Asia. And that some radiation starts in East Africa around about 200,000 years ago. But the fossil record is vast, you know, and unfortunately we don't always find the time periods we want in the same regions. You know, do we have 200,000-year-old deposits in Asia and in Europe? Perhaps we don't, and perhaps that's why we're not seeing it in the fossil record. So we have to take what we learn in the fossil record with some degree of caution, because we might discover a site tomorrow that expands our understanding. But multiple studies and multiple lines of evidence have shown that anatomically modern humans originated in Africa, and most likely East Africa. Our genus of Homo most likely originated in Southern Africa, and modern behavioral practices certainly evolved along the Cape Coastal Belt. But Africa needs to be explored, and we need to start expanding out of these academic hubs such as South Africa and the Omo Valley in East Africa, and start looking in places like West Africa for similar lines of evidence. And start embracing the power that is our African heritage.
Great. So here I have got another very important question, Alexander. It is to bring out the best of you to be presented to the world. That is the main intention. You have been talking about the evolution of human in terms of their body structure, in terms of their craniofacial features, and evolution from the primitive to the modern. The Homo neanderthal species to Homo sapiens species. The main difference between, as I understand, the Homo neanderthal species as per the fossil studies, he's just like animal, only body and soul. Now we call the same species as Homo sapiens. Sapiens means a sapient being is one who has mind. We are calling as a man. Man means, the word man came from Latin menios, which means he who thinks is called as man. So we never called an ape or anything as menios, not related to mind. So the sapient being is one who is able to think. The sentient beings are the one who are unable to think. Sentient beings are those who do not have any mind at all. They are only body and soul. All animals and all trees, all mineral kingdom. So from this point of view, I have a question for you. The evolution of the humans, is it because of the biological evolution through changes in the morphology, changes in the craniofacial features, changes in the bone structure, changes in the entire body structure? The evolution of man began like this, or yesterday one speaker by name Michael, he was talking about the God breathed into the body and being came. So is it, how do you correlate whether God has breathed something called as consciousness into the human, or the humans have been evolving from Neanderthal to Homo sapiens? What is your take on it? How do you combine these two seemingly opposite perspectives? Intriguing.
Yes, again, a very good question. You know, human beings or Homo sapiens are incredibly arrogant. We have this overdeveloped sense of ego, and you know, when we consider some of the genetic studies that are now suggesting that a large percentage of modern humans, or you know, modern living populations, have Neanderthal DNA. So what's interesting is that when we consider that, the biological concept of a species says that if an animal can reproduce young, then they are the same species. But if two animals mate and they cannot produce fertile young, so for example, you know, a zebra and a donkey are genetically similar enough for sexual reproduction, and they can produce what they call a zonkey. Okay, so it's a hybrid between a zebra and a donkey. However, all of these progenies, for want of a better word, are infertile. So you cannot then breed further. It's the same with a lion and tiger. So if the biological concept of a species is anything to go by, you know, Neanderthal is not necessarily a separate species to us, you know, but we need to consider that from a scientific basis, we start talking about anatomical species. So although it is clear that there was some form of genetic interchange between anatomically modern humans and Neanderthals, clearly the line of what is a species is quite gray in this instance. And, you know, consciousness, where does consciousness originate from? I would go back to having sort of, again, I tend to feel, and this is maybe my spiritual side coming out, but humans are egotistical. You know, if you've ever had dogs, and you know, I have seven dogs and I have 5 cats, and they have, in my mind, some degree of consciousness. Now, when do we track in human beings? When does consciousness, when does this idea of God originate? You know, I don't necessarily think that consciousness relates to a godly energy coming about and breathing the breath of God into us. I think there is a biological, scientific understanding of how our anatomy and our skeletal structure changes. But where do we track the change in consciousness? Unfortunately, it is a little bit outside of the realm of science, because you start dealing with incredibly intangible lines of evidence. And that's where, why is it when anatomically modern humans hit the landscape 200,000 years ago, why is it only around about 100,000 years ago that you get the proliferation of art? And that's why I came back to that point, in that art has some form of significance in getting us to understand, what is God. Because it's when we stop only being interested in food, shelter, and sex, and we sit under a tree one day, perhaps paint a pretty picture, and think to ourselves, well, hang on a second, where did I come from? What is God? And, I always say a lot of my colleagues, scientific colleagues, and particularly evolutionary scientists, they tend to be atheists. They tend to be very, dedicated atheists. And I always say to people, if you want to know God, sit under a tree and look at the divine complexity in everything, in the tree, in the insects, in all living creatures, and how do we track consciousness? I think the story lies in art. And although Blombos Cave at 76,000 years ago had some engravings, the Neanderthals were known to be great artists. So I think the origins of this consciousness, the origins of the breath of God, for want of a better word, lies maybe even outside of our species. And in some of the Homo Neanderthals, because there is definitely an idea of potentially shamanistic practices, which would suggest perhaps animistic beliefs in the Neanderthals. There was recently a discovery in South Africa of Homo naledi, and you have purposeful burial of skeletons going back 200,000 years ago. Originally, when the article was published, they believed, based on the skeletal structure, that the fossils were somewhere in the region of 1.6 to 1.8 million years old. But the dating came up with a date of 200,000 years old. So that blew our understanding, because when the scientists proposed purposeful burial of skeletons at 1.6 million years old, the earth and the world turned around and said, you're insane. It's impossible. That thought, that consciousness of being doesn't exist outside of our species, and it's impossible. You must be wrong. And the funny thing is that when they calibrated that date and got the dating of 200,000 years ago, all of a sudden people are like, oh, but then it's to be expected, because Neanderthals buried their dead, and maybe that's another indication. When does burial start? When is the origins of burial practices? Because no other animal buries their dead, and if we're burying something, then clearly we have a belief that, we need to preserve something beyond that physical corpse. You know what I mean? There has to be a soul essence in it. Hopefully that answers your question.
Elaborate and excellent analogies and all. Meredith Beale, I would like to invite you into the discussion. Yeah, I would like to hear from you your insights about how you feel, because you are a United Nations initiative representative from your place, and you have got a very strong religious background on one side and a very strong archaeological background on my other side. So I would like to share from your perspective also, how do you think this evolution of human beings have come? How do you think, what is your take on it?
Thank you so much, Dr. Yugandhar.
Thank you.
And very great questions and great dialogue. I know because I grew up as a scientist and I was a chemist for many years, how I looked at the world for the longest was through the laws of physics and chemistry. They did the most to explain the phenomena that I was observing. And then later I started to study Buddhism. And what fascinated me about that was it's the first time I encountered a theological or philosophical framework that didn't contradict my viewpoint from the standpoint of the laws of science and physics. And it talks about the law governing the process. And also in Buddhism, there's no need for a beginning. There's no need for a creation. Life has always been. And when you have, say, in the 1600s, when the church was persecuting people like Galileo for saying that the earth revolved around the sun and that was heretical, you find, thousands of years before then in the Buddhist cosmology, it talks about a cosmos, a universe filled with planets and stars and star systems. And the Sakamuni also talks about the uncountable planets, a number of them that populated with rational beings. So in the Buddhist cosmology, in the same way we talk about energy can never be created or destroyed, just continues to change form. So the potential for life has always been, and proper circumstances are there, then life manifests. That's my take on it. And this incredible potential that the universe has, and this unlimited reservoir of energy, power, wisdom, I see it as ever present and ever accessible, and that we all, based on dependent origination, that everything is connected to everything else. So we have access to everything else. So that's kind of how I look at things. Mute. You're muted. Unmute yourself, Dr. Yugandhar.
Sorry. Thank you, Meredith Beale. Thank you very much. And one question, a question for you, Alexander. Before the human has become Homo erectus, the time when he has become a complete biped, the foot structure and his body skeleton system was more like animal, from Homo habilis or Homo gottengensis, Homo georgicus, and so many other types of models. And now, after he has become Homo erectus, the biped, complete biped being, there are so many changes both in the body morphology and the human genetic structure. The Homo sapronensis and Homo garis and so many other models are there. Now, in the spiritual world, people are saying that there is something called a Homo luminensis. Homo luminensis is a species where the present human being is going to evolve from a different psycho-emotional frequency, from the existing denser psycho-emotional matrix to a highly radiant, highly illumined, highly enlightened being, that they are calling it as Homo luminensis, where people will not only think but live like an enlightened being. So this is the point where the consciousness is adding to the morphology of the human, not only the genetic makeup of the human, but the very consciousness and the psycho-emotional evolution. So does evolution is only pertain to only the physical structure, or it is also pertain to the consciousness structure? If it is pertain to the consciousness structure, the spiritual beings are calling it the evolving or future human as Homo luminensis. From what was Homo erectus, now they are calling Homo luminensis, all the world becoming a world of enlightened beings. So consciousness also do have evolution, not only archaeological or morphological evolution. What is your take on it, please?
One thing we're guaranteed in life is change. And evolution is obviously a physical thing, but our consciousness is absolutely evolving. you know, I just look at, for example, my own children. They are emotionally and spiritually more awakened than I was at their age. And I think I was potentially more spiritually and consciously aware than certainly my parents were. You know, I think what we need to do is we need to allow us to embrace our spirituality and consciousness. And we need to encourage our children to explore consciousness, to allow this new enlightenment to come around. I think that's a fantastic idea, you know, that we have this conscious species. Unfortunately, I feel the majority of the world is largely unconscious. You know, they just don't understand the ecological impact. Money and corporatization has become the dominance over common sense and caring. And the only way that we can change the future is by educating our kids about being spiritual, pursuing a God energy and understanding consciousness. And, you know, I've always been a proponent of, I love your, Meredith, your assimilation or understanding of Buddhism was fantastic because, you know, when I was an incredibly spiritual person and then I went into science, and I've returned back to sort of more spiritual practices. And Buddhism, again, to me, it wasn't a conflict. You know, it's just a way of life. Buddhism teaches you to be a good person and to treat people with respect and to live a life of humility. And I find that fantastic. I used to, you know, a lot of my wife is a clairvoyant medium. And a lot of my professors used to ask me when I was at university, they used to say, what does your wife do? And I always used to say, oh, no, she's in administration. Just because I didn't really have the need or desire to explain to extreme atheists what a clairvoyant medium was, you know. And I think there is, you know, even my wife, when she was younger, her parents thought she was crazy, you know, because she would see things and hear things and they didn't know. And I don't blame them, but, you know, now we're more conscious, we're more aware. So I think our consciousness is evolving. And I think the fact that we can sit like this and have conferences with hundreds of people talking about this is what is prompting this energetic, you know, direction, because hundreds of people are dedicating their energies and their passion and their love for consciousness into spaces and programs like this. And how can we not evolve a better consciousness and a better future generation by undertaking such events? You know, the World United should be applauded for their efforts just to bring similar-minded people together.
You know, I think the consciousness of the entire universe is evolving. It has to be. There seems to be no other possibility, because, like I said, ours is continually, not just year after year, but moment by moment. And the generational example that you shared, I imagine most people have that same experience. We are conscious than our parents, and they more conscious than theirs. So hopefully this trend will continue as we eventually come to a point where we have enough sense not to kill the whole planet. You know. Excuse me 1 second. I'm waiting on the call.
Awesome. Wireless caller.
Yeah. Alexander, I have one more question for you. This evolution of the species from the perspective of natural selection, because you know natural selection very well. Charles Darwin went to this Micronesian islands, the island of Galapagos. He found huge iguanas there. He studied so many avians. He studied so many arboreals. He studied so many piscians, mammals, and so many types of terrestrial beings. And he has drawn several connections between so many apparently different varieties. The oviparous and viviparous beings, the terrestrial and aquatic beings, the beings with tail, without tail, who can fly, without fly, who can climb, without climb, all these categories are there. So it seems as if so many pins in some of the scientific circles, in some of the the spiritual circles as well, Charles Darwin seemed to have connected the dots more than really tried to explain the evolution of the species from amoeba to the human species now. So from amoeba to mammalian anatomico-physiological structure and consciousness structure. So is Charles Darwin really connected the dots alone, or he has really put forward a altogether paradigm shift in human thinking by way of showcasing the theory of natural selection?
You know, I applaud people like Darwin because, you know, he sat on his research for quite a long period of time before he was brave enough to publish it. And, you know, it's not only Darwin. There were other people, one of his professors he was communicating with on the topic. And, you know, although Darwin wasn't correct in the stricter sense, in that natural selection isn't driving the evolutionary process, what he was right in saying is that natural selection is one of the things that determines what is a genetically beneficial trait. And I'm going to use, you know, my skin tone as an example. You know, people with lighter skin evolved in colder countries. They had less sun exposure, and that's why they evolved a lighter skin tone. So in a European context or in a more Arctic polar environment, having a lighter skin tone is beneficial. So in that instance, the natural selection, the sort of natural surroundings is determining what is the beneficial trait. However, if you've ever seen me after half an hour of walking on the African savanna without sun cream, I turn into a tomato. And it's simply because my skin is not designed to survive the intense African sun. So that is where natural selection certainly plays a role. And Darwin was absolutely critical. You know, he got people thinking. He got people outside of their box thinking about things that was largely being governed or dominated by religious institutions. You know, he had to be quite conservative in his approach, in what he said and how he said it. You know, because go back 100 years, the world was still an incredibly conservative place. You know, if you're a medium, you know, I don't think it would be very, you would probably struggle to exist in society. And spiritually conscious beings of the century perhaps would have been incredibly out of place even as much as 50 years ago, you know, 60 years ago in certain countries. So I think Darwin was certainly a father of great scientific research and thinking, because he challenged the understanding of the day. And I think that's what spiritualists or spiritual people need to do more, is they need to bring consciousness and spirituality out of the realm of hocus pocus, and bring it into the everyday lives of people. Because we are, you know, if we consider ourselves to be physical, mental, and spiritual beings, at least we are 30% consciousness or 33% consciousness. And I think the fact that we are in so much environmental degradation, lack of respect for the environment, lack of respect for people and human rights, I think that is because we are overly dependent on developing our physical being. We're too interested in our physical being, and we're not interested in our consciousness enough. Because when you develop consciousness, you develop humanity. And just like Darwin was the forefather of modern thinking when it comes to biological change, I think we need to start pushing through platforms like this. How do we start talking about consciousness change? How do we get the people that are not awake and too carnal, too dependent on physical, and how do we uplift the spiritual level and consciousness level of the world? Hopefully the mass meditation will produce a false energy.
Question. When I was talking before about the consciousness of the universe continuing to evolve, did you hear me or was I muted?
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
We heard you. We heard you, Meredith.
Okay, great. So I saw I was trying to mute to stop the phone. But yes, this is a fascinating discussion, and exactly, I feel the same way that you do. I was talking with someone yesterday, and to let them know how inspired and encouraged I was, and the refreshing feeling of so many people around the world engaged in this discussion. And it's just fabulous. And the fact that it happens once every 4 years is certainly not enough, because of, one, the rate of change is increasing exponentially. So, what used to happen in 6 months is now condensed. So we have to accelerate our consciousness growth, so to speak, or our rate of heightening or improving and expanding the sharing of this humanity that you're talking about. I totally agree that consciousness is increasing our humanity because we are animals and we are human beings. What I find most challenging is, I believe that when we think with our human mind, we get better results than when we think with our animal mind. And yes, our animal mind has a purpose and a survival function and all that. But what does it mean to be human? And that's what needs to be explored. And also from the standpoint of education and spirituality in education, in the same way that some years ago, the United Nations took up human rights education from the standpoint of realizing all the inhabitants of the earth need to be aware of their right to be human. And so I think there's a massive re-education of the world that needs to take place because we've all been miseducated primarily on purpose for various reasons. And the charge now is for us to re-educate the world in a more humanistic fashion.
Yeah. And I would like to share some views on consciousness from how the Vedas are called as the ancient most scriptures in the world. What Vedas spoke about consciousness, I would like to say in a few minutes. This is what I'm going to say is the ancient most description, the language of Sanskrit. Again, ancient most language. This sentence was written thousands and thousands of years back. The Vedas are those treatises of wisdom and knowledge which were never written. They have been passed from teacher to student. The student's brain has been converted into USB by way of repeated recall. That's why Vedas are called as Shrota. Shrota means that which is remembered through recalling. It was never written. So it was passed from one generation to another generation only by way of teaching through proper pronunciation and proper meaning, proper understanding them. So when this statement, which I'm going to say, was written, is not known at all. Thousands and thousands of years ago, it was told. How they have been originated, no one knows. Who has written this, no one knows. But yet it has come to our generation, and now I'm taking it as an opportunity to share on the screen with all of you. It says about consciousness, 18 words. It says like this: Na bahir prajna, na antar prajna, na bhuyate prajna, na prajnanaganam, na pragnam, na apragnam, adrushtam, alakshanam, agrahyam, avyapadesham, ekatma pratyasaram, satyam, shivam, chaturtam anyante sa atma sa na vigneyaha. Which the meaning of it is, the consciousness is something not outside, neither it is inside. It is not the point of combined consciousness. Consciousness cannot be solidified. What is understood as consciousness is not consciousness at all. What is understood as unconsciousness is also not unconsciousness at all. It is adrushtam, not visible. Agrahyam, it cannot be understandable. Achintyam, it cannot be understood by intellect. Avyapadesham, it can't be made understood by from one to another. Ekatma pratyayasaram, all the levels of consciousness, that which is wakeful, that which happens during dreams, that which happens during sleep, if all merge into one, if they all merge into one, the wakeful, the sleep, the dream consciousness, that is the real truth, that is Satyam, that is the real truth. That is Shivam, that is most delightful. There is nothing that is fourth one. It is a combination of only three things, Holy Trinity. And this put together is called as the soul, or soul consciousness. So that's what is the description that is existing in Vedas. And from this description, quantum physics, which is supposed to be the most modern aspect of scientific evolution, has been born. The physicists, the theoretical physicists of Europe, Werner Heisenberg, Albert Einstein, Nikola Tesla, and so many other type of scientists have drawn insights from this saying, contemplate on it, and presented the quantum physics. And now it is known as quantum physics. So it is about superimposition of the consciousness that has more value. All the theories of quantum physics, like string theory, the theories like superimposition, all these things have been emerged from this 18 words statement or 18 word description of what is consciousness all about. So consciousness is also evolving. Not only the human body, but consciousness is also evolving, depending upon the genetic makeup, depending upon the morphological makeup, depending upon anatomical, physiological makeup. The consciousness is also continuously evolving. And the consciousness is everywhere. And we are treating it as an individual consciousness because of mind, because of Homo sapient thinking. Sapient thinking means individualized thinking. A shift from universal thinking to individualized thinking makes us sapient beings, unlike plant species, unlike animal species. All the plants of Ficus bengalensis or banyan tree is one unit. Whatever happens to one banyan tree of one part of the world is understood by another banyan tree in different continent and different country. How? Mysterious way. Because all the species of each plant has got one common consciousness, and because of its singularized consciousness, everything is known to every tree in the world of that particular species. Same with animal. The tiger consciousness is totally different. All the tigers of the world know each other. When one tiger is killed in one part of the world, entire tiger species knows that one person of their own population is no more. When it comes to human beings, because of sapient thinking, because we are Homo sapiens, because something between body and soul called as mind has been in between, sandwiched between body and soul, we are unable to understand other humans as species, one unit. That's what this saying says, Ekatma pratyayasaram, let all be united. Not only inside out, but outside in. Everything has to be interrelated, interdependent, made it into one, made it united. So human species come to this united field, unified zone, united consciousness. And what we are doing is the functional aspect, our societal aspect, our community aspect of oneness. So what is oneness inside? We are trying to share it, inculcate, make it as a movement in the form of this world parliament on spirituality. So this is how it is happening. The oneness within is going to oneness without. Herewith we have got Mataji, Tejamai. So we have got a very beautiful discussion, Alexander and Meredith Beale. Excellent discussion from archaeology to paleontology to evolution of human beings, evolution of consciousness, the future consciousness, future conscious beings. So where we are from, where we are going to be, our children's psychology, or our own adult psychology. And Meredith Bill, I have got another question before Mata Tejomai is going to speak and also play some tune for us. The question is, Alexander was talking about my child's consciousness is different. My child's intelligence is different from what I am. Yes, the new future generation is coming up in the form of indigo children. The indigo children are the children who are more intuitive than the previous generation. Their extrasensory perception is much more powerful. They're more sensible beings. They're more responsible beings. Responsible not only to themselves but towards the environment as well. They are treating their own nature, the nature of their own self, with the nature outside. Both are called as nature, right? Environment is also called as nature. So our own nature reflects the nature outside. So the coming generation, the children of the future world are born with a lot of intuitive abilities. So these abilities need to be passed from one generation to another generation. So the consciousness is also evolving from gross mindedness to subtle mindedness, from dark mindedness to light mindedness. So we are becoming lighter and lighter, radiant and radiant, illumined and illumined, enlightened and enlightened. So our frequencies are changing continuously so as to become more and more evolved, more and more enlightened, more and more available to cosmic wisdom. And that is what is happening. And we have created this platform for this cosmic wisdom to flow through each one of us. So thank you very much. Thanks for your discussion. Thanks for your participation, Alexander and Meredith Beal. Please stay tuned for some more time. You have anything to say? Some more insights from you, Alexander?
Just thank you. It's been an absolute honor and blessing to be part of this conference. And let's all realize we are all Africans. We are all one. We are one single consciousness being. Yes, and many blessings to you all. Thank you, Meredith, for your time. Thank you, Dr. Yugandhar.
I should appreciate your time, Alexander. Thanks for you giving your time, very, very precious time. So same with Meredith, because of your schedules and all, you have come all the way. Physically, you are present here, enlightening all of us, and whole world is listening to you. And all your talk, every word that you have spoken is going to be recorded and presented and published in the online channels. Thank you very much. So I request Mataji,
yes,
and also Edmund Latla is also there here.
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay. Ma, go ahead.
Yes. Again, I greet everybody. Namaste, Hotep. Oh my God. Excuse me, I have a small technical thing. Jambo, Ubuntu, Sawubuni, Mayegawe. Indeed, we are one. There is something that I'm always, thinking about, about how do we measure everything that we know about, and particularly, with all the scientific world. I believe we use tools, right? We use instruments to measure the DNA, the time, all the archaeological and all the, sciences that are generated through our, search for knowing more about who we are, where we come from, and how we are able to evolve through the ages, right? And to my experience, I've realized one thing, that the instruments that we're using are only the reflection of the state of consciousness evolution that we're in. In other words, we do extraordinary discoveries all the time, but at the same time, we are limited by our understanding in the frame of our dimension that we are in. So I think that if we were to include more of our intuitive, I would say, how can I express that? Our intuition is also is a great part of our experience, right? But what is scientific has to be proven systematically in a much more logic way, you would say. And then we say it's scientific because it has been repeated, proven over and over, and then it is globally accepted, you know, for the global, I don't say consciousness, but the global mind in the sense of acceptance of what is. But to my experience and understanding, the truth, there are as many realities as we are numbered in our incarnations on the planet and in the universe anyway. Now, the truth is that one thing that is, I would say, immutable. So what would happen if science were to embrace all that is non-explainable with words? If we start to use the wonderful tools like meditation, for example, and the experience that is born from our meditation to have a deeper understanding of what we are, even as a species, I think that the science would make an immense leap in its evolution and on how it could open the possibilities. Because facts are just possibilities that have been accepted and endorsed by maybe a class of people who are leading this world. But we're just in possibilities so far. So consciousness is evolving because of the memory of ourselves, but it has nothing to do with mind. That's my, I wish that we could use really these tools, all the science. We can find it, as you said, Dr. Yugandhar, in the Vedas. We find it in our ancestral traditions. All those are extraordinary tools to measure and to explain. But we must also go beyond the limitation of the dimension to not only understand, but overstand what's happening.
I get it. It's like like you said, we're at any given point, we're limited in our ability to describe what's happening, or to measure what's happening, or to communicate what's happening, though we may be aware beyond our ability to communicate. So that's what I'm taking from that.
Yes, and also, see, for example, now we are in a state of evolution where we think we have discovered so many things, yeah? And as Alexander was saying, there's some kind of arrogance in the fact that we are human beings, because we think that we're above so many things. We invented God, maybe God invented us, but God, do we know what God is really? I think the concept of God I'm not saying God doesn't exist. I believe in God also, but my experience is that we are also gods. And when we say God, what is it exactly? It is God is the thing that we can't explain. So we have to, because we're in a mode of separation, we have to create this that we cannot explain with words, right? That thing that created us, but that we also created. Because when we start now to converse about what God is, see how many religions and how many differences we have. We have one thing common, which is God, but at the same time, we debate with many attributes that we personally give to that thing or that being that we call God. But I think that's just that's just a consequence of the separation. Now, when we start to unite and when we start to really accept one another, okay, you say something, you say it because you had an experience, or you say because you just repeat it mechanically. Yeah, when it's coming from your own experience and that we share, and now we start sharing in acceptance, without the opposition, then we become more like peace, in harmony. And this is the idea of start to go into what we call unity, right? But as you say, when we can't explain something, but what's happening? We're limited also by words. Now we're communicating through words. But isn't it that we are evolving and that we're going to use more other tools like telepathy, like just loving, like silence as well? So I think of continuing our evolution, but in taking in consideration more and more those other tools, and those other capacities and possibilities, even through communication, for example. You see what I'm saying?
You're asking a question or giving input as Mataji?
Same thing. It's the same thing. I am asking the question for the world, and I'm also, it's my input actually.
Okay.
I'm asking, now we are together, right? And we have to talk because it's a conference somehow.
Yeah.
But when we use words, I cannot even express what I want to convey just by words. My vibration has to be a certain way so that I can transfer my energy. When I say my energy, we're all energy, right? But let's say the quality of the energy that I am, and I'm sharing it with you. Somehow you have to feel it, right? So I'm constantly in the process of, I would say, working on myself to elevate the consciousness, to open the chakras, to create space for light, the light that I am. And I'm creating more and more and more space. And when we all do that, we come to what we call perfect, like I see it as perfection. I see it as Satya, Satya Yuga, and the era of love. Because love is, I think, it's ultimate. The light that we are, if we create space to let it be, to let it shine, then we come to that, But we're very busy. We're very, very busy, creating stuff, but it's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad, but we really have to create the space. And we have many tools to do so. Some meditate, some do Tai Chi, some do, so many things are there. Can't describe. For me, it's yoga. Yoga because, yoga is union. And because we're incarnated in human beings, we have this left side, this right side, these nadis, these meridians, all this, it's the universe is actually expressing through our being. Is that we reflect the universe. We are the universe.
Yeah.
Okay. But the rate of vibration makes us almost solid beings, almost. But we are made of water, mainly. Yeah. Like some say 75%, 80% of water. Somehow we're not only solid beings. And the air and all the elements that makes us, right? We have to respect that. We have to cultivate that and see where the balance will come, So my take, I say it with words, but create more space for light, more space for light. Do it on a constant basis and see what's happening.
Yeah. So let me throw some light on the usage of words, languages for expression, usage of silence for expression, usage of creating mind space. What this space all about? You are talking about space for light. Let me throw some light on it. So let me throw some light and provide some space for thinking. So let us take a beautiful animal of Africa, giraffe. Giraffe is the tallest animal at present in the world, with long neck, we all know it. One very special feature of giraffe is giraffe doesn't have vocal cords. It is a dumb animal. It cannot speak. It cannot communicate through sounds. It is the most silent big animal of the world. But yet it communicates. How it communicates? It doesn't have to communicate through vocal cords. It communicates through his own consciousness frequency, through his own emotion, through his own gesticulations and gestures, through his own fight and flight mechanisms. So anybody who has a pet, for example, say dog, the most common pet of the world, every dog knows how to communicate without using English, French, or Afrikaans. Every dog makes his owner cuddle. Cuddles his owner. Every dog can never fail in its expression. No dog fails in its expression. Whatever he wants, he knows how to express it. So expression is not only through language of vocal cords, language of sounds, it is through some other channels as well. For example, the sound that we hear has a range of 20 to 20,000 hertz. The sounds which are below 20 hertz and more than 20,000 hertz cannot be heard by the human ear. The human physiology, the cochlea, the staples, the inner ear technology, the brain ear mechanisms, and the hormones and the electricity that passes through the nerves between ear and brain, all these things are not evolved as far as its anatomical and physiological structure of brain is concerned. But the dog can perceive sounds which are less than 20 decibels and more than 20,000 decibels. How is it possible? Even a sound is more than 20,000 decibels, the ear cannot hear. The supersonic jets, planes sound cannot be heard by the human beings. So there is something called as in Sanskrit Ud-Gita. Gita means voice. We say Bhagavad-Gita, right? Bhagavad-Gita is said to be a very reputed or sacred text in India. It was a message given by one godly being, a great master. I call him as great master instead of God. A senior master or a super master, an evolved master, much more evolved master, Krishna consciousness. So he called Gita. Gita means voice. Ud in Sanskrit means silence. Ud-Gita means the voice of the silence. How do you speak through silence? We can convey so many things with the help of silence. The language of silence, the communications of silence, the expression of silence put together is called as Bhagavad-Gita. This doesn't have any language. The word language came from Latin, which means laziness. Laziness. How do you understand the word language as laziness? Humans are too lazy to get into their own silence. Humans are too lazy to speak through silence. Humans are too lazy to evolve the element of Bhagavad-Gita, the voice of silence. We have become more grass, dense, lethargic, slothy, sluggish. We are not evolved like animal beings. We are not evolved like plant beings, but think that we are more evolved than them and eat them. We are making our stomachs the graveyards for all animals. Flies, creeps, crawls, everything is put into his tummies. We have made this as a graveyard for them. We can't even create or erect an epitaph for them. No, the stomach has become, all the bones, muscles, skins are digested here, unfortunately. And we call them as superior beings. The word animal came from anima. Anima means lively, more vital, more energetic, more vigor. Animated, we say. Animation, more vigor, more energy. Humans who created language are lazy, basically. The very word of language means lazy. And there are 2,700 languages in the world which have a lipi, which can be written. And there are 2,300 languages in the world which cannot be written. It only passed from generation to generation. There are so many languages of the tribes. Nowadays, many linguists have come forward to create lipi so that they won't become extinct. Many Indo-Aryan languages have become extinct. Many languages of the Middle East have become extinct. Many Indo-European, the Celtic languages have become extinct. The Indo-Germanic languages have become extinct. Many languages of the Red Indians, Incas, Druids, Curanderos, so many languages have become extinct. The languages of Siberian and old times shamans have become extinct already. So now people say that all the world languages came from only 2 languages. The entire Indo-Aryan, the Indo-European, Indo-Celtic, Asia-African languages. There are 240 Asia-African languages. Out of all the languages, more than 1,000 languages that are spoken in Africa, more than 25% of the African languages have links with Sanskrit. It is clearly established in the linguistics, the science of linguistics, that more than 240 languages of Africa that are spoken with the help of lipi and without lipi have origins with Asia and Sanskrit.
Yes.
There's many of the languages are still existing. So languages, the 5,000 plus languages have emerged from basically 2 languages, that is Sanskrit and Orgam. Orgam is one ancient language. The South American languages before Spanish and Portuguese, all the local languages, indigenous languages of the Incas, the Andean people, they're all Aztecs. So all these people have spoken this Orgam language. The Mayans spoke this language of Orgam. So all the languages of the world came from these 2 major languages called Sanskrit and Orgam. There were no many languages, but because of accent, because of pronunciation, because of diaspora, because of dialect, the languages have been divided, ramified, classified, categorized into so many lipi and lipiless and 5,000 languages. All these things because of only one thing, that is human laziness, inability to speak through silence like animals, inability to speak through silence.
It reminds me of our discussion reminds me of the story of the 100 monkeys in terms of the collective consciousness of a species. And I don't know if you're familiar with this experiment, but they were doing an experiment on intelligence and communication. And so they were teaching monkeys how to do a task. And this particular task was cleaning their food. Basically, it was potatoes and how to get the sand off the potatoes. So they taught one monkey or a few monkeys, and eventually they shared that knowledge amongst themselves. And then when that sharing got to the 100th monkey, all of the monkeys on the island started that same behavior. But not only that, the same species on other islands also started that same behavior. So that communication, you know, obviously there was no physical way for, you know, they didn't swim to the other location. They had no telephone, telegraphy, all of that stuff. It was species consciousness, the collective consciousness of the species. And at some point when knowledge becomes critical mass, everybody understands. So from the standpoint of us as human beings, once enough of us are awake, then everybody else wakes up, at least from the correlation of that experiment.
So herewith we have got Vanja Michuki. So Vanja, you have been listening to what is going on now. We have been discussing about human archaeology, human morphology, the evolution of human beings from the perspective of morphology and craniofacial features to consciousness evolution, how consciousness has been evolving from older generations, how languages have been created, the language of sound creating mind space, how to become a radiant being in future. So we have been discussing for the past almost 60 minutes about this. I would like to especially invite you into this discussion, Vanja. Please throw some light on all these things, whatever you feel like. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Yugandhar. It's been very interesting to listen and reflect. And my sense is that as we elevate in unity consciousness, we recognizing that language presents barriers, but our being and raising our vibrational states and just being that, you know, I feel that the idea of being our consciousness is the thing. It's being and doing that without necessarily needing language, because I feel if you know, Mataji talked about you need to communicate it beyond just being that, you know, state is enough to communicate. I feel that that vibration transcends language and anything else. It communicates itself. And being in nature, I think for me, is that experience. I don't feel as though unity consciousness is just amongst the human species and all plant species or animal species kind of have their own consciousness. I feel that we're entirely one. You know, if you spend time in forests, just to be in a forest, these are the most incredible, knowledgeable beings. You know, I constantly go to forests to seek answers, wisdom from trees, just spending time with trees. It's incredible how wise and how much knowledge and how much love, you know, I think love is the thing, the experience of acceptance and understanding from everything that is around us. So you talk about dogs, animals. I have dogs. That is exactly the experience that I feel from my dogs. You know, they have a consciousness, and I experience that they do have a way of communicating. It's beyond this language. You know, it's beyond my opinion. It's beyond judgment, and I feel that that is what I personally feel, even being in this space, in this World Parliament on Spirituality. That is the sense that I come away from these sessions with. When I turn off my computer, I feel elevated because I've just been with you. You know, it's that I think is the most powerful thing. So song, you know, how else another way to communicate through music. Mataji, you've been singing for us and bringing us together with sound and vibration. these are different ways that we may not be adapted to entirely because we're so used to talking in our different languages and dialects and using theories and research and what have you, but just coming back to the simple act of being with, I feel is the most powerful way of experiencing that unity consciousness. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Yes,
Wonderful.
yes.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I also wanted to say, you know, like the tongue, because we speak about language, but the tongue also, and the tongue, okay, see how it's beautifully done, by the way. The tongue is an organ, isn't it? And we use it like we're possessed, really. You know,
It's a muscle.
Yeah, it's a muscle, sorry, yes. So, but it has its purpose, right? And, you know, when we go into practicing certain techniques, like, you know, yogic techniques, yeah, we realize that the tongue might not be made for what we use it for. We as human beings, we use tongue as we are possessed, I'm saying. Like, you know, we use it to talk. We even use it to curse, because when we go into a nice, positive talk, it's wonderful. We create, you know, beautiful things and we create health, right? But when we use the tongue to speak badly, then we start cursing, really. We create disease. And when we use our tongue to eat unconsiderably, like, you know, too much, right? Isn't it a curse for ourselves? It's a curse to ourselves. When we use the tongue, so the tongue, we use it to eat, to speak, but there are other ways to use tongue. Okay, I'm not going to go too deep into that, because then I'll tap into the secrets of, you know, the Kriya Yoga, but you can use the tongue for another purpose. And when you go to that technique, you realize that you can use the tongue to actually enlighten yourself. And what I can tell you is that the position of the tongue, when you use it to enlighten yourself, is in complete silence. I'll give you a hint. If you take your tongue and you just place it on your palate, and you stay in meditation for a while, even that small posture, yeah, that small posture, okay, it might not happen right away when you practice it, but if you practice for a certain, you know, time, you can secrete, the body can secrete some, you know, fluids that are totally beneficial for you. So I just wanted to say that, you know, we use our physical body, mind, emotions, but not necessarily the proper way, you know, or the way it could be used, like our organs. When I was talking about creating more light within, our organs, we think that our stomach and digestive system is only made for digestion, but it's actually not. All our organs, muscles, cells, they have their proper existence, their proper purpose, right? And if when we start to create light within, we start to discover that, oh, actually, see, for example, when we describe the chakras, And when we say, okay, for example, we know that kidneys are related to fear. So, or, you know, the liver is related to anger. So the purpose of the organs is actually maybe double-sided. Like they have like their physical purpose, but they also have their spiritual purpose. Let's discover that. Let's discover who we are, what we are, how we can, you know, we used to fly before. We used to fly, levitate. We used to have all these beautiful spaceships. And we can find some like behind you, Dr. Yugandhar. The pyramids, there are spaceships also, you know? Let's rediscover that. We can be one, but we can be one, I think, only if we create more space within to rediscover through other means that just the limited tools that we use to calculate or measure. We are the tool. The main tool is us, our perception, divine perception is getting us to know the truth and discover so many things. Multidimensionally again. As you said, Wanja, it's not only for the human species. And even if it was so, as human, we are also multidimensional. So it includes all, you know, the galaxies, the cosmic beings, the ascending masters, and everybody. Sometimes I see them also, you know, they come a different way. They don't come like this, huh? With the two eyes. Sometimes they come here through the medulla oblongata. You know, it's funny. It's funny, the perception we have, because we are trained to use our bodies, minds, and emotional bodies a certain way, very limited way indeed. So limited. So, as you said, Dr. Yugandhar, we are lazy to get into the silence. But I think one of the reasons why we're lazy to get there is also the fear. Because when we get into the silence, if we don't have proper sense, sometimes things that happen or the things that we perceive, they can be frightening. Sometimes, I'm not saying always, because it depends on the way we vibrate. So if we vibrate at a very low rate, as we are mainly educated to do, you know, the things when we get into the silence, the first things that can come, sometimes they can be, it's unusual, so we get scared. We're not used to it. But if we do it gradually with sense, you know, with what we call guru, means, you know, divine guidance, then it becomes the norm. It's not like we're scared. Yeah, like I say, perception is not only this. You can feel things with your heart. Sometimes you perceive, you can smell with your heart even, you know. See with your, this medulla oblongata, which is this gland in the base of the skull. And you see through that. Sound comes through that also. Why is it that we say that the human being cannot perceive certain sounds? It's because we think that the hearing is only the ear, but it's actually not. The perception, there can be other things, can be other organs, other glands, other muscles, other cells. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you very much, Jyotsna. So we have been discussing for almost 100 minutes, and let us take a small video of one wonderful spiritual speaker, Ostile Molefi. So he has sent a very, very, very beautiful video. I would like to just